Good morning, everyone. Can you hear okay in the back? Yep. As I'm sure you're no doubt aware by now, if Lord Coe has had anything to do with it, London will be hosting the Olympic Games next summer. So this morning I'm just going to talk you through some of the opportunities and possible difficulties employers might face during the Games, suggest some ways of managing these potential difficulties. You may well be thinking, why do we need to start planning for an event in deepest, darkest East London a year or so in advance? Well, I thought similarly until I started looking at the numbers. Now, apparently, during the 2-week period of the Olympic Games, London's going to host some 18,000 athletes, 22,000 members of press, and some 7.7 million spectators. So all in all, it's going to mean a very busy city for a few weeks next summer. And with ticket sales confirmed this week and volunteer interviews taking place this month, you're likely to have to face some requests sooner rather than later. Is anyone here lucky enough to have their Olympic tickets? Oh, a few, maybe. I haven't. So it might be worth considering to begin with what other businesses in London are planning to do. Deloitte carried out a survey recently, and the results suggest that some 30% of companies will consider allowing flexible working patterns during the Games. 30% said that they'll be understanding about staff who arrive at work late. 8% indicated they'll support staff who want to work from home, and some 11% would actively encourage people to have meetings outside of London. It might also be worth you considering how you've managed past large-scale sporting events in your workplace, just perhaps the World Cup, and think about what worked well and what worked less well for you during that time. So how will you prepare to get your business ready for the Games next summer? You might have a business continuity plan in place. So these are plans that are designed to help your company stay up and running during any interruption. So for example, if your IT systems collapse for whatever reason, or you can't get key personnel into the office. So you might start by considering whether you can adapt that policy or adapt your plans to meet the possible impact or the disruptions of the Games. Next, you might consider reviewing your HR policies, check that they're up to date. Are they fit for purpose? Do they do the job that you want? Have you come across any difficulties in enforcing them in the past? Having in place an effective IT, various leave policies, remote working and flexible working policies might help you have a slightly smoother transition while you're planning for the Games. You might also need to review your contracts of employment, particularly focusing on the hours and place of work clauses, and consider whether they're sufficiently flexible for you to be able to adapt your working practices if necessary to accommodate any difficulties or challenges. So one way of dealing with increased congestion in the city or demand to watch key events might be to consider temporary flexible working patterns for some of your staff. So you might allow your staff to come in and work early, perhaps finish early, and vice versa. You'd need to think in advance how many staff you might allow to work flexibly, what roles might be suitable for more flexible working patterns and some that might not. Carefully consider whether any changes that you might allow to working patterns are simply for the duration of the Games, or whether you might use this as some kind of trial period to work out whether more flexible working patterns might be something you'd consider moving forward. Either way, make sure you communicate that message clearly to your employees. Another way you might deal with increased congestion in the city and possible delays in reaching the office might be to allow some or all of your staff to work remotely. So this might mean working from home, perhaps working in offices outside of London if you have any, or even working from some of your key client or key customers' premises outside of the city. Again, you need to plan in advance. How many employees will you physically need to be in the office, if any? Do you have the right technology in place to allow people to work sufficiently? Check your contracts of employment. What do they say about your place of work, or what does the mobility clause say? And do you have enough flexibility in those clauses to ask your staff to work from another location? Another thing you might consider if your staff aren't physically in the office with you is how are you going to monitor performance during this time? You need to communicate a very clear message if you are going to allow staff to work remotely, that they are expected to carry out their normal tasks and duties. It's not an excuse to sit at home watching the athletics all day. Check that your performance management and your disciplinary policies cater for this. Based on past Olympic experiences, apparently some 30% of staff will request some form of leave during the Olympic Games. And also with the Games being held during the summer school holiday period, which is obviously a traditional period for staff to want to take their holidays, this might mean a bit of a HR headache. Firstly, work out your minimum staffing levels, and you need to work around that, obviously. Check that your policy is firstly up to date, and secondly, look at the policy and to see whether that does deal with high demands for annual leave. If it does set out how you'll deal with competing demands, try to follow that policy as far as possible. If it doesn't, you might consider allocating leave on a first-come, first-served basis, or perhaps you might think it's fairer to work from a ballot basis. And we obviously recommend planning for annual leave as early as possible, but if you do have late requests for annual leave and you need to refuse those requests, make sure you do that properly. So if you are going to serve a counter notice on an employee to say that they can't take their leave when they want to take it, you need to make sure that notice is served in as many days in advance of the leave as the leave in question. So for example, if your employee wants to take 5 days leave, you need to tell them 5 days in advance that they're not allowed to take that time off. Consider whether you might allow any exceptional or unpaid leave. The Olympic Games are going to require some 80,000 volunteers, and some of them will work for days, some of them will work for the whole 2-week period. So you may well be faced with requests from your employees who want to volunteer during the Games. You should consider whether you ask your staff to take their holiday in order to volunteer, or whether you might allow them to take unpaid leave or perhaps even paid leave. It's obviously a good opportunity for your staff to develop their skills. It might be a good PR opportunity for your business, but you obviously need to balance that with the needs of your business and your customers and clients. Internet use. If your staff can't get to the Games themselves, the next best option might be to stream events live to their PC. Doing this may well be in breach of your IT policies, but you might consider whether you're prepared to relax these policies slightly during this period. You might not enforce the policies as rigidly as you might normally do so. If you do decide that you're going to relax your approach slightly, you should consider carefully how you want to communicate this message to your staff so that it doesn't come back to bite you later. A second point to consider, if you are going to have increased usage in your offices of internet, whether your systems can actually cope with that. If your systems do collapse for whatever reason, you need to make sure you've got a contingency plan in place just in case. Unauthorised absence. As I'm sure you're all aware, unfortunately, when there's a large-scale sporting events, we often see an increase in apparent sickness absence, with perhaps some staff calling in sick when they really want to watch the Games, or perhaps nursing a hangover from the previous day's celebrations. So now's the time to review your absence and your disciplinary policies to ensure that they deal clearly with these scenarios. You might consider whether your sickness policy provides that employees have to call in each day of of their absence, or it might say that they need to go to a return to work meeting. Both strategies can sometimes be a deterrent for those considering taking a sickie. So key messages for dealing with unauthorised absence. First of all, don't jump to conclusions. Obviously, some staff do genuinely fall ill during these events. If you do decide that you want to discipline staff, ensure that you follow your policy as far as possible and that staff are disciplined in a consistent manner. You don't want to find yourself in a position where staff in some departments are being disciplined while managers in other departments might be turning a blind eye. So ensure that staff are all dealt with consistently. Possible problems with patriotism. Beware giving or even being seen to give priority to Team GB supporters. Not all of your staff might be supporting Team GB, and you don't want to find yourself in a difficult situation where you might, in extreme situations, be faced with a discrimination claim. Make sure your staff are aware that banter and jokes are one thing but harassment are quite another. It might be a good time to consider when you've last updated staff on your equal opportunities policies and your harassment policies, so that everyone is aware of what is acceptable behaviour and what isn't. Last few issues to consider. You might need to relocate staff nearer to the Olympic site, perhaps, depending on your business needs. You might possibly need to change your office opening hours to take account of increased trade or footfall, perhaps. And unfortunately, large-scale sporting events are sometimes a target for terrorism, so you need to just ensure that you've got crisis management policies in place. So just by way of summary, ensure that you've got your policies in place. If you don't have those policies in place, communicate a clear message to staff about what will be tolerated and what won't be tolerated in advance. Consider a pragmatic approach, so you might consider screening events, perhaps in a room similar to this, so that staff might be able to watch key events. Beware discrimination and harassment claims. And lastly, if you do decide you want to take a slightly more informal approach during the games, that could earn you some fairly easy employee relation points and possibly save you management time in going through disciplinary processes and possible discrimination claims. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you for listening. And I'm now going to pass over to Molly, who will be talking to you about the Bribery Act.